Hello everyone and welcome to not one but two games from this, today's title Tuesday. It is Jani Polnić versus Hans Niemann and then also one more game, but first let's check out this one. And before we actually check out the games, huge congratulations to Ella and Magnus Carlsen on getting, on their first baby being born. It's a very special moment and I'm sure everyone knows it, but just in case you didn't, yes, they are now parents. So that is why Magnus is not playing Title Tuesday, if anyone was wondering. Now, let's get to the game. Jan Nepomniachtchi with white opens with pawn to d4. We have knight to f6 by Hans and pawn to c4. We have pawn to e6, knight to c3, and of course Hans doesn't shy away from a challenge, bishop to b4. The Nimzo Indian defense is on the board. We have pawn to e3 and castles kingside. We have pawn to a3, captures, and knight to c6. And this is usually met with bishop to d3, but here Jan wants to mix it up, plays pawn to f3. And there are only a handful of games with this exact same move order. b6 from Hans, and now there are, again, a couple of bishop to d3 games, but here we have pawn to e4, and it is now as of move 8 that we have a completely new game. Hans goes bishop to a6, pretty standard idea, puts pressure on c4, we'll go knight to a5 probably, bishop to g5 pinning the knight, and pawn to d6. We have bishop to d3 and pawn to h6, chasing away the bishop. We have bishop to h4 and pawn to e5. We have knight to e2 by Nepo and knight to a5. Now putting pressure on that c4 pawn as planned. We have castles and bishop captures on c4. So it is not uncommon for white to give this pawn. Bishop captures, we have knight captures, and queen to d3, developing the queen with tempo. We have pawn to b5 defending, and pawn to a4. We have pawn to c6, a captures, c captures, and rook to a6 before allowing black to execute pawn to a5. We have queen to c8 by Hans, and Nepo just doubles up on the a file. Rook f to a1. Knight to d7, of course avoiding a bishop capture, and now bishop to e7. While it seems like a very, very natural move, it's not all that impressive because it doesn't really threaten anything. Of course, Nepo thought it did, as there's a double attack on the d6 pawn, but Hans saw one move further. We have rook to e8, bishop captures on d6, but now Hans doesn't recapture. Hans plays rook to e6, and now he's just threatening to win a piece. So d captures on e5, and now knight to c5. And there's no other move for Nepo than to capture the knight, as his queen and rook are under attack. So bishop captures on c5, rook captures on a6, rook captures, and queen captures. End result being that Hans is now up in exchange. We have pawn to f4 by Nepo, rook to c8 attacking the bishop. We have bishop to d4 and rook to d8. Pinning the bishop, we have pawn to h3 and queen to c6. Getting the queen off of the a file. Now Hans is just ready to start advancing that a pawn to promote it to a queen. Knight to g3, we have pawn to a5, knight to f5 with some nasty threats like knight e7 check would pick up the black queen. King to h7, and now queen to g3. Hans is now, he has to be careful. He doesn't want to get checkmated on g7. So queen to g6, we have queen to h4, and rook to d7. We have queen back to a1 by Nepo, pawn to a4. Now that the king is nicely safe on h7, it's time for Hans to continue advancing the past a pawn. We have queen to b1, queen to c6, and now knight to d6, offering a trade of knights. Knight captures, we have e captures, and rook captures on d6. Pawn to e5 check, seemingly blundering a rook, but not really. Rook to g6, and while Nepo would really love to play pawn to f5, there is a checkmate being threatened on g2. So, of course, you have to prepare it. Queen c2, defend the g2 pawn. Pawn to a3, Hans just continues advancing the past a pawn. Pawn to f5, we have rook to g5, even pawn to f6 check. Rook to g6, and now f captures on g7, but Hans doesn't care. Queen to d5, we have pawn to e6, opening up the dark square bishop. Just pawn to a2, threatening pawn to a1 to come with check. G8 queen with check, king captures, and e captures on f7, also with check. King captures queen to f2 with check. We have king to g8 and now pawn to c4, opening up the bishop's path to the a1 square. We have b captures on c4 and now king to h2. And the question is, can Nepo survive this? He does have a very strong bishop here. He managed to free it up, but can the queen do something? He goes with queen to d6 with check, pawn to g3, and now queen to d5. Queen to e3, now threatening some checks along the back rank, but just rook to e6 by Hans. With queen to f2, queen to e4, and that's all there is. Nothing more for Nepo to do. We have queen to g1, queen to e2 with check, and now bishop to f2. And here, Nepo resigned without even waiting for Hans's next move, as next move would be, of course, a1 queen. And then Nepo would have to capture it. Then queen captures on f2 with check, king h1, and rook to e1, with checkmate to follow in a few moves. So this was the penultimate round. Hans defeated Nepo, and now we enter the final round, basically the game to decide the winner of the Title Tuesday, and that is wrong game, and that is going into the game Hans Niemann versus Alireza Firouzja. So let's check it out. Hans also won some rating here. He was 3170, now he's 3180. Hans with white opens with pawn to e4, and Alireza goes pawn to c6. He counters with the Caro-Kann. Knight f3, we have pawn to d5, d3, and bishop to g4. We have pawn to h3, bishop to h5, and knight to c3. We have pawn to e6, closing the structure now that the light square bishop is out of the cage. And g4 is a move that you might expect here. Hans just plays queen to e2, and it is now, as of move 6, that we have a completely new game. We have bishop to b4, pawn to a3, attacking the bishop, bishop to a5, and pawn to g4. We have bishop to g6, bishop to d2, knight to f6, and pawn to e5. We have knight f to d7, pawn to h4, and pawn to h6, making some room for the light square bishop. We have pawn to h5, bishop to h7, and the bishop to h3. We have pawn to c5 by Alireza. And now you might be expecting a move like pawn to g5, but no, pawn to b4. Something that you would expect against the French, but here it also works as a theme. We have c captures on b4, knight to b5, threatening knight to d6 check, and much like in the French, Alireza should just allow it. He should go b3, and if check, just king e7, and everything is perfectly fine. But after knight to b5, we have bishop to c7, and now pawn to g5 by Hans, knight to c6, and pawn to g6, weakening the e6 pawn. We have bishop to g8, adding a defender, and a captures on b4. And now you should play f captures on g6. You have prepared it, the e6 pawn is defended, and after something like bishop c3, defending on e5, let's say captures and rook g1, black is still in a very difficult position, but maybe you can defend. But yeah, this is 5 plus 0. We have to remember there is 0 increment, so if you go into a long thing, that might be your last move. So knight d captures on e5. Instead, we have knight captures on c7 check, queen captures, and now pawn to c3 by Hans. Knight captures on f3, queen captures, and now again captures would probably be better. Pawn to f6 by Alireza. b5, chasing away the knight. We have knight to d8, and now pawn to d4. We have pawn to e5, captures, and Hans just castles kingside. And this is a complete mess of a position. Seems like Alireza's king is forced to remain in the center of the board. Alireza does have the strong center, but yeah, once rook e1 comes, it's going to be hard to keep that king in the center. Pawn to e4, just rook f to e1. The pawn is not moving anywhere. Bishop to e6, we have bishop captures, knight captures, and now queen to f5, putting pressure on the d5 pawn and on the knight. Queen d7, defending both, and now bishop to e3, putting pressure on that a7 pawn, so making sure you don't really castle anywhere. Rook to f8, attacking the queen. Knight g5 was probably Alireza's last hope of surviving the game. Queen e5, and now rook to d8. We have rook captures on a7 by Hans, rook to f3, and now rook e to a1, doubling up on the a file. King f8. Alireza managing to sort of artificially castle kingside, but with that pawn on g6, it's not really the safest place for the black king. Rook a8 by Hans. We have king to g8, and now rook captures on d8. Knight captures, and now bishop to f4. We have queen to g4 with check, bishop to g3, and now, interestingly, you should play rook to f8, but Alireza played queen to d7, and now Hans is completely winning. But it's such a tricky position that he does play a very nice move in the game. Rook to a8 was played, but queen to c7 is the deadliest. Because how do you defend? If you trade queens, for example, captures, you attack the knight, knight e6, and now look at this, bishop d6. You control that f8 square, and there's no defense against rook a8. You don't get checkmated or anything, but try to make a move for black here. Let's say play b6. You can't move anywhere. I mean, you move the rook, then rook a8 check, followed by checkmate. And now after rook a8 check, you can block knight f8, but now both the rook and the knight are stuck here guarding the black king. You can just improve the position of your king as much as you want, and then you trade on f8, and then you just win a simple king and pawn endgame. That's all there is to it. But yeah, time on the clock. We have rook to a8 right away by Hans, and now rook to back to f8 by Alireza. Again, there was maybe a potential for an e3, but yeah, situation on the clock. We have queen to d6 now by Hans, queen to g4, and queen captures on d5 check. We have knight to e6, and here Hans has a checkmate in 9. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the cleanest solution to this position while I give you a couple of seconds. The move, of course, is rook captures on f8, which was played in the game. Only Hans, of course, with Alireza's 13 seconds on the clock, did not look for a forced checkmate. He was just trying to win the game. But I will show it as you guys probably have found it, and that is queen d7. And there's no defense here. That is the threat. Once you defend it, let's say queen f5, you're going to go bishop to d6 check. Once you go king g8, queen to c8 with check. And now you have to start giving up material. Queen to f8, bishop captures on f8, knight captures, queen e8, and so on and so on. Very quick checkmate. But okay, Hans only needs to win the game to win the tournament. He played queen to d6 check, king to e8, queen to b8 with check, king e7, queen captures with check. We have king to f6, queen to d5, queen to f3, and now queen to e5 with check. King e7, pawn to b6, advancing the b pawn to victory, as you know you usually do with the white pieces. King to d7, queen to d5 with check. We have king to e7, and now pawn to b7, and he was in this position on move 48 that Alireza Firouzja resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. There are no checks, there are no tricks. The queening square is covered by the bishop, so that is all there is to it. Hans wins everything. He wins the tournament with 10 out of 11, so 0 losses, only 2 draws. And these are his opponents for the tournament. So he faced 2 international masters to start the tournament, and then finishes off with nice, almost all victories against the other 9 grandmasters that followed. And after round 5, I mean, look at the Sergei Zhigalko, Rina Jumabayev, Hikaru Nakamura, Hao Shu, Yanni Poneshi, Alireza Firouzja. So he defeated everyone. A draw against Hikaru. Absolute masterclass here by Hans. Big congratulations to him. And yeah, just an overall very, very strong performance. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Once again, a huge congratulations to Magnus and Ella on the birth of their baby, and also big congratulations to Hans on winning Title Tuesday. I would like to thank Christopher Thompson, Robert Arathon, Rokao, John Anderson, and Ulrich Thini for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And if you still haven't, as I always say, first link in the description below, download Lotus Chess, start improving, crush everyone, and join us for a nice tournament next week. I'm also gonna stream it. I'm also gonna be joined by the founders as usual, so it's gonna be great. Hope you can make it. See you then.